10 minutes into clearing out my grandmother's house, my mother pressed a check for $41,000 into my brother's hand. My money. The account Grandma left in my name. "His business is drowning," she said. "Your little savings can wait." My stepfather nodded along, his pen still warm. I stood 30 feet away, holding a box of Grandma's things. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just closed the box. Because near the end, my grandmother told me something. Quiet, careful, meant only for me. And I knew this was far from finished. 3 weeks later, her executor gathered every one of us around that same kitchen table. My mother came in smiling, certain she deserved more. Then he opened the folder and began to read. "I'm Thea. I'm 34, and I've spent 11 years as an ICU nurse, which means I've learned to keep my face still while everything inside me goes to war." My mother mistook that stillness for weakness her whole life. Standing in Grandma's front room that afternoon, watching my brother fold that check into his back pocket, I let her keep believing it. Because the quietest thing in that house wasn't me. It was the promise my grandmother had already put in motion. Let me take you back to the morning it all started to unravel. The morning my grandmother died. It was a Tuesday in June. I was on the tail end of a 12-hour shift when the call came, and I already knew before I answered. You develop a sense for it in my line of work. My grandmother, Ruth Lindqvist, had held on for 4 days past what any of her doctors expected. 81 years old and stubborn down to the last breath. She waited, I think, until I could get to her. I drove straight from the hospital in my scrubs. I didn't change. I didn't stop. When I got to hospice, the nurse on duty, one of my own kind, met me in the hallway and just nodded. And I knew I'd made it in time, but only barely. Grandma's room smelled like the lavender lotion she'd used my entire life. Her hand, when I took it, was paper-thin and cool. But her eyes were sharp. They were always sharp, right to the end. "There's my girl," she said. Her voice was a thread. "There's my Thea." I sat on the edge of the bed and held that hand and told her I was there. I wasn't going anywhere. She could rest. "The things you learn to say." She shook her head, slow but insistent. "Not yet," she whispered. "Listen to me first." I leaned in close. What she said next, I'll come back to. Because at the time, I didn't fully understand it. I thought it was the morphine or the fog that comes at the end. It wasn't. Every word was deliberate. She had been holding it for years, waiting for the right moment, and this was the last one she had. Then she pressed something into my palm and closed my fingers around it. "I'll tell you what it was soon, but first you need to understand the family she was leaving me alone with. My father died when I was 6. Daniel Lindqvist, Grandma's only son. I have exactly 4 real memories of him. His laugh, which came up from somewhere deep, the scratch of his weekend beard against my cheek, the way he'd swing me onto his shoulders so I could touch the top of a doorframe, and the lake, a green, still lake, where he'd hold me above the water and pretend to drop me, and I'd shriek and cling and beg him to do it again. That's it, 4 memories for a whole father. He died in December of 1998 on an icy highway, coming home from a job 2 counties over. He was 32. I was in 1st grade. I remember my mother screaming in a way I had never heard an adult make sound. And then very quickly, I remember her stopping. My mother's name is Rhonda, and if there's one thing you should understand about Rhonda, it's this. She does not linger in grief. She reorganizes around it. Within 2 years, she'd met Gary Marsh at the insurance office where she'd taken a job. Within 3, she'd married him. And within about a week of that wedding, every photograph of my father came down off the walls of our house. I was 8. I remember standing in the hallway looking at the pale rectangles on the paint where his face used to be. I remember asking where the pictures went. My mother told me they were put away safe, and that Gary was my father now, and that it wasn't kind to make Gary feel like a stranger in his own home. I never saw those photographs again. When my brother Cody was born, the erasing finished. We became the Marsh family, Rhonda, Gary, and Cody, and then me. Thea Lindqvist, the girl with the different last name, the leftover from a story nobody was allowed to tell anymore. I want to be fair. I want to tell you my mother was a monster because it would make this easier. She wasn't. She was worse than that, in a way. She was a woman who decided, very early, which of her children was the future and which one was the past. And she never once pretended otherwise. Cody got the new bike. I got Cody's old one, repainted. Cody got the braces. I got told my teeth were fine, honey, don't be vain. Cody got the college fund. I got a folder of loan applications and a speech about how nurses always find work. I don't say this for pity. I say it so you understand the arithmetic I grew up inside. In my mother's math, I was always the number you subtracted from. The one place that math didn't apply was Grandma's house. Ruth Lindqvist was my father's mother, and she never let go of me the way my mother let go of him. Every other Sunday, my whole childhood, she'd pull up in her old sedan and take me for the afternoon. To her house, with the lavender smell and the good cookies and the wall of photographs my mother had banished from ours. That's where I saw my father's face growing up, on Grandma's wall. She had them all. Daniel at my age, Daniel graduating, Daniel holding me the day I was born, Daniel with me on his shoulders at that green lake. "Don't you let them tell you he wasn't real," she'd say to me, tapping the frame. "He was the best thing I ever made. And you're the best thing he ever made. Don't you forget it." I never did. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because the thing Grandma pressed into my hand in that hospice room, I need you to hold that in your mind. A small, cool weight, fingers closing over mine. Before I go any further, if this story is already tightening something in your chest, if you've ever been the child who got subtracted, do me a favor and hit that like button, and subscribe if you haven't. It genuinely helps stories like this reach the people who need to hear them. And I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight, and whether there was a grandmother in your life who saw you when nobody else did. Drop it in the comments. Then stay with me, because the funeral was where I first realized my mother had already made her plans. The funeral was on a Friday. My mother organized it in 2 days flat, which should have been my first warning. Rhonda is never that efficient about anything that doesn't benefit her. She wore navy, not black. She stood at the front of the little chapel and accepted condolences with a soft, brave smile, dabbing at eyes that stayed remarkably dry. She told the pastor that Ruth had been like a second mother to her, which was a sentence so brazen I nearly laughed out loud in the pew. Ruth had not spoken more than 10 words a year to my mother in 2 decades. They tolerated each other across me, the way you'd tolerate a bad smell in a room you couldn't leave. Cody showed up 40 minutes late, in a wrinkled dress shirt, smelling faintly of last night. My half-brother is 25 now. He has our mother's ability to look wounded on command and none of her discipline. 2 years ago, Gary co-signed a lease and a stack of loans so Cody could open a gastropub downtown called Copperline Kitchen. It had gorgeous Instagram photos and, by all accounts, a kitchen that hemorrhaged money. At the reception, in the church basement, over grocery store cookies that were nothing like Grandma's, I watched my family the way I watch a monitor at a bedside, looking for the thing about to go wrong. It was Gary who said it first, quietly by the coffee urn, thinking I couldn't hear. "So the estate," he murmured to my mother. "How long does that take to shake loose?" My mother didn't even lower her voice. "There's the house, and whatever she was sitting on in the bank." A pause. "Ruth always claimed she had something set aside for the girl. We'll see about that." The girl. 34 years old, standing 15 feet away, and I was still the girl. I set down my coffee. I didn't say a word. But I felt the small, cool weight in my pocket, the thing she'd pressed into my hand. And I thought, you have no idea what she set aside, and neither do I. Yet. That night, I finally looked at it properly. It was a key. Small, old, brass, worn smooth at the edges from handling. It hung on a length of faded blue ribbon, the kind you'd tie in a child's hair. Not a house key, not a car key. Something smaller and more particular than that. I sat at my kitchen table and turned it over under the light. There were numbers stamped into the head of it, almost rubbed away. I couldn't make them out. And I heard my grandmother's voice again, from the hospice bed, saying the thing I hadn't understood. "Everything your father tried to do for you is still there, Thea. She never got to it. I made sure. When the time is right, the man will tell you the rest." "The man? What man?" I'd asked her. But she was already drifting, and those were nearly the last clear words she gave me. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake with that key on the nightstand catching light, and I felt like my grandmother had handed me the corner of something enormous and left me to find the rest of it in the dark. The day after the funeral, my mother called a family work day to clear out Grandma's house. I should have known what it really was. I got there at 9 on a Saturday morning. My mother's SUV was already in the driveway, hatch open. Gary's truck behind it, and Cody's leased sports car, the one Copperline definitely couldn't afford, parked crooked across the lawn. Inside, they weren't packing, they were harvesting. My mother had a legal pad and was going room to room, assigning things. The good china to her. The dining set to Cody's restaurant. It's basically vintage. It'll photograph great. Gary was already unhooking Grandma's television. And the wall of photographs, my father's wall, was bare. The frames were stacked face down in a cardboard box by the door, like trash set out for collection. I went to that box first. I lifted the top frame. Daniel, 12 years old, gap-toothed, holding up a fish. I held it for a second too long. "Oh, don't get sentimental," my mother said, breezing past. "We're not keeping all that. It's just clutter, Thea." Clutter. Every photograph of her dead husband. My dead father. Clutter. That's when I noticed the paperwork spread across the kitchen table. Bank statements, Grandma's checkbook, and a printed transfer form half filled out. I understood then what the workday was. Before I could say anything, my mother walked to the counter, picked up a check she'd already made out, and pressed it into Cody's hand. "And you already know what happened next. $41,000. My little savings can wait. What I didn't tell you yet is what I did after I closed that box. I walked out to my car. I sat in the driver's seat with my hands on the wheel, and I did not start the engine for a long time. Not because I was crying. I wasn't. Because I was thinking about a brass key on a blue ribbon, and a bank account nobody could quite explain, and my grandmother's voice saying she made sure they never got to it. $41,000 my mother had just given away. But my grandmother had used the word everything. Everything your father tried to do for you is still there. 41,000 didn't feel like everything. It felt like a piece. So I started the car. And instead of going home, I drove to the one person left alive who might know what my grandmother had been protecting. My Aunt Rosemary is my father's older sister, Grandma's daughter. She's 63, never married, and she lives 90 minutes north in a house full of books and rescued cats, and she is the only blood relative on my father's side I have left. Rosemary and my mother despise each other with a purity that's almost admirable, which is exactly why my mother hadn't invited her to the family workday. I called from the road. Rosemary answered on the first ring, the way she always does, like she's been waiting. "Thea, I've been thinking about you all week." I told her where I was. I told her about the check, about the 41,000, about my mother calling it my little savings. The line went quiet. Then Rosemary said something that made me pull off onto the shoulder. "Thea, is that account still in your grandmother's name? Or did your father's money finally get moved?" "Your father's money." "Aunt Rosemary," I said slowly, "what money?" And that was the moment the floor of the whole story shifted under me. "Oh, honey," she said, "sit down. You don't know, do you? She never told you." I told her I was already sitting. I told her to please just talk. But Rosemary is careful the way Grandma was careful. She didn't blurt it. She asked me one question instead. "Did she give you anything? Before the end? Did Mom give you something to keep?" My hand went to my pocket. The key was there, warm now from my body. "A key," I said, "on the blue ribbon. I don't know what it opens." I heard my aunt exhale, long and slow, like something she'd carried for years had finally been set down. "Then she did it," Rosemary said softly. "She actually did it. That woman, even dying, she was 3 moves ahead of them." "Ahead of who? Rosemary, please?" "I can't tell you the whole thing over the phone. I promised her I wouldn't be the one. She wanted it to come from the paper in front of them. She was very specific about that." A pause. "But I'll tell you this much, so you can breathe. That account your mother just raided, it was never really your grandmother's money to begin with. And it was never your mother's to touch. Never really hers, never her mother's to touch. I didn't understand it yet, but I felt it land somewhere deep, like the first note of a song you've been trying to remember your whole life. There's a safe deposit box," Rosemary went on. "Your grandmother kept it for 28 years. The key you're holding opens it. Everything's in there, Thea. Everything he left you. The proof of what it is and where it came from and who it was always meant for. 28 years. I did the math without meaning to. My father died 28 years ago." "Why didn't she just give it to me?" I asked. My voice cracked finally. "All these years, why keep it locked away?" And Rosemary told me the one thing that made all of it make sense. Because if she'd handed you cash at 18 or 25, your mother would have found a way to get her hands on it inside a month. You know she would. Ruth knew it too. So she didn't hold it to keep it from you, sweetheart. She held it to keep it safe until you were strong enough to hold it yourself, and until there was a piece of paper your mother couldn't argue with. A beat. The man who has the other half of this is the executor, Howard Pratt. When he calls a meeting, you go. You sit down, and you let him read. I want to be honest with you about how I felt, hanging up that phone on the side of the road. I did not feel triumphant. I felt 6 years old. I felt like a girl standing in a hallway, looking at pale rectangles where her father used to be, being told he wasn't real, being told to make a stranger feel at home. I felt every photograph face down in that cardboard box. And underneath all of it, for the first time in 28 years, I felt him, my father, reaching across almost 3 decades through my grandmother's careful hands to leave me something my mother could not subtract. I drove home. I put the key in a small dish on my nightstand where I'd see it every morning, and I waited for a man named Howard Pratt to call. He called on a Wednesday. "Ms. Lindqvist, this is Howard Pratt. I was your grandmother's attorney." His voice was older, dry, precise, the voice of a man who reads documents for a living and chooses every word like it costs money. He told me he was the executor of Ruth's estate. He told me there would be a formal reading. He still did them in person, he said, for families where it matters. He gave me a date, 3 weeks out, at Grandma's house. The kitchen, 2 in the afternoon. Then he paused, and his voice changed just slightly. "Ms. Lindqvist, your grandmother left specific instructions with me. Some of them concern you directly, and some of them are time-sensitive." A careful breath. "Before that meeting, I'd like you to retrieve the contents of a safe deposit box she held at First Cascade Bank. She indicated you'd have the key." My hand found the dish on the nightstand. "I have it," I said. "Good." A rustle of paper on his end. "Then I'd suggest you go soon. And Ms. Lindqvist, when you see what's there, you may have questions. Write them down. Don't call your mother about any of it." A beat. "I think you understand why." I told him I understood. I told him I'd be there. After he hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, holding a brass key on a faded blue ribbon, thinking about a locked box that had been waiting 28 years for me to be ready. I didn't go the next day. I'll be honest with you about that. I was scared. Not of the box, of what it would ask of me, because I already knew, in the pit of my stomach, that whatever was inside was going to require me to stop being the quiet girl who got subtracted and become someone my family had never let me be. So I went to work instead. I took extra shifts. I put the fear where I put all my fear, into the 12 hours of keeping other people's parents alive. And while I stalled, my mother moved. The first text came on a Sunday. "Mom, Thea, honey, we need you to sign the estate paperwork so we can settle Ruth's house. Nothing complicated, just formalities. Gary's cousin can notarize." I read it 3 times. "Nothing complicated, just formalities." I typed back, "What paperwork exactly?" The reply came fast, too fast, like she'd had it ready. "Mom, just a family agreement on how everything divides. We all sign, it goes smooth, no lawyers taking a cut. You know how these things get ugly. Let's not let it get ugly." Let's not let it get ugly. From the woman who'd handed away $41,000 of mine on a kitchen counter. I didn't answer. And an hour later the tone shifted, the way it always did, the second I didn't jump. "Mom, I hope you're not going to be difficult about this, Thea. Your grandmother would be heartbroken to see you tear this family apart over money. That's not how I raised you." I set the phone face down on the counter. "That's not how I raised you." As if she'd raised me at all. As if I hadn't raised myself in the gaps she left. Here's what I've learned about people like my mother, from a lifetime of study. They don't fear your anger. Your anger they can work with. They can call it hysterical, ungrateful, unstable. What they fear is your silence, because silence means you're doing something they can't see. So I gave her silence, and I finally drove to the bank. First Cascade is a squat brick building with a lobby that smells like carpet cleaner and old money. I gave the woman at the desk my grandmother's name and the box number stamped into the key. She checked my ID against a signature card. Ruth had added me as an authorized holder years ago, it turned out, back when I was 26 and had no idea. Another quiet move made the better part of a decade before I'd need it. The vault was cool and silent. The clerk turned her key, I turned mine, and she slid a long steel drawer out of the wall and set it on the table in a little private room and left me alone with it. I sat there and looked at it for a full minute before I could make my hands open it. Then I lifted the lid. I need to tell you what was in that box, because every single thing in it had been placed there on purpose by a woman who knew she wouldn't be alive to explain it. On top was a photograph, not a copy. The original. My father, young and sunburned and laughing, standing waist-deep in a green lake with a 5-year-old girl on his shoulders, both of them squinting into a summer that ended 28 years ago. Her hands were buried in his hair. He was holding her ankles like they were the most precious things he'd ever been trusted with. The girl was me. The lake was real. My memory was real. He was real. My grandmother had kept this photograph in a bank vault for 28 years, so that my mother could never put it face down in a cardboard box. I sat in that little room, and I cried the way you cry when you're completely alone and finally allowed to. Not pretty, not quiet, 28 years of it. When I could breathe again, I looked at the rest. Underneath the photograph was a business-sized envelope, yellowed at the edges, with 2 words on the front in my father's handwriting, the same handwriting as a birthday card I still owned, the only card he'd ever finished before he ran out of years. It said, "For Thea." If you've made it this far with me, I want to ask you something, and I really do want your answer in the comments. Have you ever found a piece of the truth your family spent years keeping from you? A letter, a photo, a document that changed the whole shape of your childhood in a single afternoon? What did you find, and did you ever let them know you knew? Tell me. I read them. Now let me tell you what my father's letter said, because it's the reason none of what came later broke me. I won't read you the whole thing. Some of it is only mine. But my father wrote that letter in the fall of 1998, a few weeks before the highway took him, because a coworker his age had just died and it had rattled something loose in him. He wrote that he'd taken out a life insurance policy, that the payout, if the worst ever happened, was meant for one person and one person only. Me. Not the household, not my mother's future, me. He wrote that he'd named his own mother, my grandmother, as the beneficiary on purpose because he trusted her to hold it, and he did not, even then, fully trust that the money would survive contact with anyone else. He was 32 years old, and already, somehow, he knew. He wrote, "If you're reading this, then I didn't get to be there, and I'm so sorry, sweetheart. But I found a way to be there anyway. This is me, showing up. This is your dad, still trying. This is your dad, still trying." I want you to hold on to that line because it becomes important. The third thing in this box was a folder, and the folder was the part my grandmother built for the lawyers, not for my heart. Inside it was the life insurance policy itself, a payout of $41,000 paid to Ruth Lindqvist as beneficiary in the spring of 1999. There were the original bank records showing that Ruth had taken that exact sum and opened a dedicated account with it. An account she never added a dollar of her own money to, an account she labeled in her own careful hand on every statement, D's Insurance, for Thea. 27 years of statements. She'd kept every one. The balance had barely moved. She'd never spent it. She'd only guarded it. And on top of the folder was a letter from my grandmother, dated 8 months before she died, when she first got the diagnosis. It was addressed to Howard Pratt, with a copy for me. It was witnessed and notarized. I'll read you the part that mattered, the part I've since read maybe 100 times. To be clear, for anyone who needs it in writing, the funds in the account labeled for Thea were never mine. They are the proceeds of my son Daniel's life insurance, left by him for his daughter, held by me in trust and in love until she was ready. I never spent a cent of it, and I never will. It was never mine to give, and it was never anyone else's to take. If it has been touched, Howard, you know what to do. Bring it back to her, and read this out loud so they all hear whose it was. It was never mine to give, and it was never anyone else's to take. I sat in that vault and I understood finally the whole shape of what my grandmother had done. She hadn't just left me money, she'd left me proof. She'd left me my father's own words, and her own words, and a paper trail 28 years long, all of it aimed at a single afternoon 3 weeks away, at a kitchen table, in front of the whole family, where a man named Howard Pratt would open a folder and read the first line. My mother had emptied an account she thought was Grandma's leftover savings. She had in fact stolen the last gift my dead father ever gave me, and she had no idea. I made copies of everything that day. I kept the originals in the box, exactly where Grandma left them, and told the clerk I'd be back. Then I called Howard Pratt from the parking lot, and I told him what I'd found, and I asked him the only question that mattered. "Can we get it back? She already gave it to my brother. He's already spending it." Pratt was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, there was something almost warm under the dry. "Ms. Lindqvist," he said, "let me explain something to you about the law and about your grandmother. who understood it better than most attorneys I've met. And he told me two things that changed everything I thought I knew about how powerless I was. The first thing was about the account. Because Ruth held the money purely for me, funded only by my father's insurance, never mixed with her own, labeled for me for 27 years, with written declarations from both my father and my grandmother, the law would not treat it as part of Ruth's general estate at all. It was, Pratt said, a trust in everything but the fancy paperwork. The money had a rightful owner, and it was not my mother, and it was not the estate, and it was not Cody. It was me. It had always been me. The second thing was about how my mother had taken it. Your grandmother added your mother to her online banking 2 years ago, Pratt said, when her eyesight was going. A convenience. A power of attorney, in effect, to help pay bills. A pause. But a power of attorney dies with the person who granted it, Ms. Lindqvist. The instant your grandmother passed, your mother's authority over any of those accounts ended completely. Every dollar she moved after that moment, she moved with no legal right whatsoever, on funds that were never hers, from an account that was always yours. I stood in that parking lot and felt the ground finally go solid under my feet. So what happens now? I asked. Now, Howard Pratt said, you come to the reading, you sit down, you say nothing until it's time, and you let me do the thing your grandmother hired me to do. A dry, small sound that might have been a smile. She was very clear that she wanted your mother in the room when it happened. I've done this work for 40 years, Ms. Lindqvist. I have never had a client plan a moment quite so precisely. I'd almost feel sorry for the other side, almost. I want to tell you I felt vindicated, powerful, ready. Mostly I felt calm, a deep, strange, unfamiliar calm. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the girl bracing for the subtraction. I was holding the whole equation, and I finally understood what my grandmother had been buying me all those years, with her patience and her silence and her 27 years of unspent statements. She'd been buying me the one thing my mother had spent a lifetime denying I deserved. Standing, the 3 weeks before the reading were the strangest of my life, because on the surface, nothing changed. My mother kept texting, warmer now, sensing my silence, trying a new key in the lock. Mom, I don't want us to be at odds, sweetheart. Family is all we have. Come to dinner Thursday? Just us. I didn't go to dinner, but I didn't fight either. I just kept being quiet, and I could feel it driving her slowly out of her mind, because a fight she could win and silence she could not. Meanwhile, downtown, the sign went up. Cody posted it, of course, a whole celebratory reel. A ladder, 2 workers, and a gleaming new sign going up over copper-lined kitchen in brushed copper letters that must have cost a fortune all on their own. The caption said, New chapter, grateful for family who believe in the dream. 40 little heart emojis. My mother commented first. So proud of you, baby. This is what family does. This is what family does. I looked at that reel for a long time, standing in my kitchen. My father's $41,000 melted down into copper letters spelling out a restaurant that lost money every month. The last thing he ever tried to do for me turned into a backdrop for a video. And here's the thing I want you to understand, because it's the whole reason I didn't just march down there and burn it all down. I could have. That afternoon, I had every document I needed. I could have called my mother and read her the policy over the phone. I could have posted the truth in the comments under Cody's reel for everyone to see. But I thought about my grandmother. 28 years of statements. 28 years of not saying a word because she understood something I was only just learning. The truth is a weapon you only get to fire once. Fire it early, in anger, over the phone, and they'll have 3 weeks to build a story around it, to lawyer up, to move the money again, to turn me into the villain. Fire it at the right moment, in the right room, with the right man reading the right paper. And there's nothing left to build a story around. So I let the sign stay up. I let my mother be proud. I let them all keep believing they'd won. And I started getting ready. I called Aunt Rosemary that night and asked her to come stay with me the week of the reading. I wondered if you'd ask, she said. I already have a bag packed. Rosemary arrived on a Monday with a duffel and a cardboard box that turned out to be full of my father. Photographs my grandmother had slipped to her over the years, his high school yearbook, a cassette tape, if you can believe it, of him singing badly in a car in 1991. Rosemary and I sat on my living room floor for 3 hours, and I met my father in pieces I'd never been allowed to have. She'd be glad you're getting these now, Rosemary said, holding a photo of Daniel at 19. She always said the cruelest thing your mother did wasn't taking the pictures down. It was making you think you'd imagined him. Making you think you'd imagined him. That was it exactly. That was the whole wound, named in a sentence. I told Rosemary about the box, about the letter, about what Pratt had said, and I watched my aunt, 63, tough as a fence post, put her hand over her mouth. "For Thea," she repeated, when I told her what was written on my father's envelope. "In his hand?" "In his hand." Rosemary was quiet a moment. Then, "You know she tried to get to that money once. Your mother, years ago." I hadn't known. Rosemary told me the story. About 11 years back, when money was tight in the Marsh house, my mother had gone to my grandmother and asked, sweetly, the way she asks, whether Ruth might help out the family with whatever she had set aside. My grandmother had looked her son's widow dead in the eye and told her plainly without a flicker of apology, "That money is Thea's, not yours." And my mother had smiled her soft, brave smile and said, "Of course, Ruth, I only meant," and left, and never asked again. Not because she'd given up, because she'd learned to wait, the same way I was learning now. She'd waited for the one moment my grandmother couldn't say no anymore. She'd waited for Ruth to die. That's the thing about my mother I need you to sit with. The $41,000 wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't a grieving woman making a bad snap decision. She had wanted that money for over a decade. She'd been told, to her face, that it was mine, and the very week the only person guarding it was in the ground, she went and got it. She knew, on some level, she knew exactly what she was taking. The second week, the pressure changed shape. My mother, sensing that texts weren't working, escalated to what she does best, the ambush disguised as love. She showed up at my apartment on a Wednesday evening, unannounced, with a casserole, of all things, like we were a family in a commercial. Rosemary was out at the store, thank God, or the whole thing would have detonated on my doorstep. I let her in. I wanted to see the shape of what she was doing. She set the casserole on my counter and looked around my small apartment with the expression she always wore in my spaces, a little pitying, a little satisfied. Then she sat down at my kitchen table, folded her hands, and got to the point faster than usual. "Thea, the reading's next week. Howard Pratt." She said his name like it tasted strange. "I want us on the same page before we walk in there, as a family." "What page is that?" I asked. "Your grandmother was old. She was sentimental. She said a lot of things over the years about setting money aside for you and honey. That was sweet, but you and I both know she wasn't exactly rolling in it." A soft laugh. "Whatever's left after that house, it needs to go where it does the most good. Cody's business is at a real turning point. If it goes under, Gary and I are on the hook for the loans. We could lose everything." There it was. The real fear under all of it. Gary had co-signed. If Cody sank, they sank with him. "So when Pratt reads whatever he reads," my mother went on, "I need you to not make it complicated. Don't go grabbing at every little thing with a sob story about your father. We agree, we sign, we keep it in the family. That's all I'm asking. Don't go grabbing at every little thing with a sob story about your father." I looked at my mother across my own kitchen table, and I felt the brass key in my pocket, and I said the only true thing I could say without giving it all away. "You already spent it, Mom, the account. You gave it to Cody 2 weeks ago." Her face did something complicated, a flicker of calculation, gone almost too fast to catch. "That was Grandma's spare savings," she said smoothly. "Family money. It was never really yours, Thea. You need to stop acting like it was. It was never really yours." There it was, the sentence she'd been saying to me in 100 forms my entire life. About the money, about my father, about my place in her family. It was never really yours. I didn't correct her. I didn't tell her that in a week, in that very room, a man would read a paper proving that it was never really hers. I just looked at her, and I let the silence stretch until she couldn't stand it. "I'll be at the reading," I said finally. "I'll sit down, and we'll all find out together what Grandma actually left." Something in the way I said it made her go still. For 1 second, my mother looked at me. Really looked. The way you look at a stranger who knows your name. Then she smiled and stood and told me to heat the casserole at 350 and left. I threw the casserole away the second the door closed. 2 days later, my grandmother's next-door neighbor called me. Mrs. Alvarez, 80, who'd lived beside Ruth for 30 years and never missed a thing on that street. "Thea, honey, I saw them at the house again. Your mother had a man in a suit walking the rooms with a clipboard." A pause. "A realtor, I think." Measuring. Measuring. The house wasn't even out of probate and my mother was already showing it to be sold. But that wasn't why Mrs. Alvarez had called. "There's something else," she said, quieter. "2 weeks before your grandmother passed, she came over to my kitchen, slow, on her cane. She made me promise something. She said, 'If anything happens fast, you tell Thea to go to the bank. Tell her to use the key. Don't let Rhonda get to her first.'" Mrs. Alvarez's voice wavered. "I've been sick, I didn't call you sooner. Did you go? Did you use the key?" I stood in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear and my eyes stinging. "I went," I told her. "I used the key. She got there first anyway, Mrs. Alvarez, but Grandma got there before both of us." The days after that got quiet in a way that felt like a held breath. Cody called me once. That surprised me. My half-brother almost never called. It was a short call, and I'll be honest, it complicated something in me I'd wanted to keep simple. "Hey," he said. "So, Mom said you're being weird about the estate stuff." A pause. "I just wanted to say, the loan thing is real, Thee. Like, if Copperline closes, I don't know what happens to me. I put everything into it." I asked him if he knew where the $41,000 had come from. "Grandma's account," Mom said. "Why?" He didn't know. That landed on me strangely. My mother hadn't even told her golden child the truth of what he was spending. She'd handed him my father's death and called it family money, and Cody had bought copper letters with it and never asked a single question, because asking questions wasn't a thing our family did. For one moment I felt something almost like pity. He was 25 and drowning, and he genuinely thought his family believed in his dream. He didn't know he was standing on a trap door his mother had built. "Cody," I said, "whatever happens next week, I need you to remember I gave you a chance to ask questions, and you didn't take it, okay?" "That's kind of ominous, Thee." "Yeah," I said, "it kind of is." And I hung up, and I did not feel triumphant, and I did not feel guilty, and I sat with the strange grown-up weight of knowing that sometimes the people who wrong you are also just people, and it doesn't make the wrong any less real. And it doesn't mean you owe them your silence forever. That week, work gave me the thing I didn't know I needed. I had a patient. I'll call him Mr. Okonkwo, and change enough that no one could find him. 84, end stage, no advance directive, and a daughter 3 states away who hadn't spoken to him in 9 years. We called her when he took the turn. She said she'd think about it. She showed up at 4 a.m. on the last night. Too late to talk to him. He was already leaving. I found her frozen in the doorway, unable to cross the threshold of a room with her dying father in it. I've done this 100 times. I took her elbow, and I walked her in, and I told her what I tell all of them. He can still hear you. It's the last thing to go. Say what you came to say. She held his hand and she talked for 2 hours. About a fishing trip, about a fight over a car, about all the years she'd wasted being angry, and how she'd tell herself she had time, and how there was never as much time as you think. He died a little after 6, with her voice in his ear. And I drove home in the gray morning, and I sat in my car in the lot, and I thought about my father, and the letter in the vault, and the line in my father's hand. "This is your dad, still trying." He'd been 32. He'd known there might not be time, so he'd found a way to show up anyway, across 28 years, through his mother's careful hands. I wasn't going to let my mother throw that away and call it clutter. Not for a restaurant sign, not for anything. I went into that reading a nurse. Someone who sits with the truth at the exact moment everyone else looks away. My mother must have felt the ground moving, because in the last week she stopped asking nicely and started working the family. It began with a group text I wasn't on. I only saw it because my cousin Denise forwarded it to me, horrified. My mother had messaged the whole extended clan, aunts, cousins, Gary's side, people I hadn't seen since somebody's wedding. "Just a heads up," it read, "that Thea has decided to make Ruth's passing about money and is threatening to bring lawyers into what should be a private family grief. I'm heartbroken. Please keep our family in your prayers, and if you speak to her, remind her what really matters. Rhonda." Remind her what really matters. Within an hour, my phone was buzzing. An aunt I barely knew, telling me I should be ashamed, that my grandmother wasn't even cold. A cousin asking if it was true I was suing Cody. Gary's sister informing me that real families don't do this. It was a beautiful piece of work, honestly. My mother had gotten in front of the story. She'd painted me as the greedy one, the difficult one, the girl making her grief about money. 3 days before a lawyer would prove that she was the one who'd taken a dead man's gift to his child. The old me would have panicked, would have typed long, desperate explanations, would have needed every one of them to understand I wasn't the villain. I didn't answer a single one, because I finally understood. I didn't need 40 relatives to believe me. I needed one man, one folder, and one room. Let my mother spend her last 3 days building a story. In 72 hours, Howard Pratt was going to read a piece of paper that turned every word of it to ash. Then Gary sent his own message, just to me, shorter, colder, in his flat account executive voice. Thea, I've spoken to someone about the estate. You have no legal standing to hold up the settlement, and if you keep obstructing, we'll have no choice but to protect our family's interests. Sign the agreement. This is your last friendly heads up. I read it twice. Our family's interests. Sign the agreement. He didn't know I'd been to the bank. He didn't know about the box, or the policy, or the notarized letter, or that our family's interests was about to collide with a document his cousin's notary stamp couldn't touch. I typed back a single line, not angry, just true. See you Saturday. And I put the phone down, and I felt, for the first time in my life, completely unafraid of Gary Marsh. 2 days before the reading, I did the last thing I needed to do. I went back to the bank. I sat in the little private room one more time, and I took my father's letter out of the box and the photograph of the Green Lake and my grandmother's notarized declaration. Pratt had the legal originals filed already. These were the pieces that were mine, the pieces I wanted with me in that room. I slid the photograph into a plain envelope and put it in my bag, because I'd decided something. When the moment came, when Howard Pratt read the first line and my mother's world tilted, I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to gloat. I was going to do one small, quiet thing. I was going to put my father back on the table. The night before the reading, I barely slept. Rosemary made tea at 2 a.m. when she found me at the kitchen window, and we sat together in the dark, and she told me one last thing about my grandmother. You know why she picked the kitchen for this? Rosemary said. Not the lawyer's office. The kitchen. Her kitchen. I said I didn't. Because that's where your mother handed Cody the check. Ruth found out. Howard told her the withdrawal was already happening before she passed, but she was too weak to stop it. She couldn't stop it. Rosemary's voice caught. So she did the only thing she could. She made sure the truth would come home to the exact room where they took it. She wanted your mother sitting in the same chair at the same table when she found out what she'd really done. I looked out at the dark street and thought about my grandmother, 81 and dying, unable to lift her own teacup, arranging a reckoning she'd never live to see. 3 moves ahead of them, even then. She loved you like her own, Rosemary said quietly, because you were the only piece of Daniel she had left, and she was not going to let them erase him twice. The morning of the reading, I dressed carefully, not for battle, for dignity. A plain gray dress, my father's photograph in my bag, the brass key on its blue ribbon tied around my wrist like a bracelet where I could feel it. Rosemary drove. Neither of us said much, and I want to tell you that I walked in there certain and calm, but that would be a lie, and I promised you the truth. Because on the drive over, the fear came back. The old fear. The 6-year-old in the hallway. What if the paper wasn't enough? What if my mother had already spent it and there was nothing to recover, and I'd have this proof of my father's love and no way to make it mean anything? What if I sat down at that table and opened my mouth and became exactly what she always said I was? The difficult one, the grabby one, the girl making a sob story out of her dead father? What if after everything she won anyway? I made myself breathe. 4 counts in, 4 counts out, the thing I teach frightened families in the ICU. And I reached down and touched the brass key tied at my wrist, and I heard my grandmother's voice, thin as thread. Everything your father tried to do for you is still there. And the fear didn't leave exactly, but it made room. Grandma's house looked wrong from the street. 2 weeks of harvesting had hollowed it out. The curtains were gone. The porch chairs were gone. Through the front window I could see the living room, stripped to the carpet, with pale rectangles on the walls where the photographs used to hang. My father's wall, bare again, like my mother had reached across 2 houses in 28 years to make the same empty spaces twice. There were 3 cars in the driveway, my mother's SUV, Gary's truck, and a silver sedan I didn't recognize. Whose is that? Rosemary asked. I didn't know yet, but I'd find out inside, and it would tell me exactly how carefully my mother had planned her own version of this afternoon. We went in through the kitchen door, the way family always had. The kitchen was the one room still furnished, because my mother had left the table, the long oak table where I'd eaten 1,000 cookies as a child, where Grandma had taught me gin rummy, where 2 weeks ago a check for $41,000 had changed hands. They were already seated. My mother at the head of the table, in Grandma's chair, which landed in my chest like a small, deliberate cruelty. Gary beside her, arms crossed. Cody slouched at the far end, scrolling his phone, and across from my mother, a stranger, a thin, nervous man in his 50s with a leather folio and a notary stamp sitting on the table in front of him like a little judge's gavel. Thea. My mother's smile was wide and warm and completely without her eyes. And Rosemary, I didn't realize you were coming. I'm sure you didn't, Rosemary said and sat down anyway. My mother let that go. She gestured at the nervous man. This is Dale, Gary's cousin. He's a notary. I thought, since we're all here, and Howard Pratt is apparently running late, a little glance at her watch performed, we could get a head start, make things easy on everybody. And she slid a stapled document across the oak table toward me. I looked down at it without touching it. Family Settlement Agreement, the header said, and below that several dense paragraphs, and at the bottom, signature lines. One of them had my name typed under it. Thea R. Lindqvist. It's simple, my mother said, in the warm, reasonable voice she used right before the knife. We all agree the estate divides fairly. We don't drag lawyers and courts into a grieving family, and we each sign. Dale notarizes. By the time Howard gets here, it's done, and we can all move on with our lives. She smiled. Your grandmother wouldn't have wanted us fighting, Thea. Sign, and we put this behind us. Here is what that document did, in plain English, because I read every word while they watched me. It declared that all parties agreed the estate consisted solely of the residence and personal effects. It made no mention of any account. None. And it contained a single sentence, buried in paragraph 4, in which each signer waived and released any and all claims to any other asset, account, or fund associated with the decedent, known or unknown. Known or unknown. My mother had drafted a document whose entire purpose was to make me sign away my father's insurance money before a lawyer could ever say the words out loud. She'd built her own reading, 3 days early, in her own kitchen, with her own notary, and she'd typed my name at the bottom of it. I want you to understand how close it came to working. Because if I hadn't gone to that bank, if I'd stayed the quiet girl who signed what she was told, I would have picked up the pen. I would have waived my claim to something I didn't even know existed, and it would have been legal, notarized, airtight. My father's last gift, signed away by my own hand, and I'd never have known what I lost. That's the setback, if you want to name it. That's the moment I understood these people would not have simply taken it from me. They would have made me hand it over, smiling, and call it keeping the family together. Gary uncrossed his arms. Just sign it, Thea, he said. Flat. No warmth at all. You've been dragging your feet for 3 weeks, and frankly, it's insulting to your mother. This family has bent over backwards for you your whole life. The least you can do is not blow up Cody's shot at something because you're bitter about a bike from 20 years ago. There it was, Gary's real face, the one under the nice stepdad performance. To Gary, I had always been the cost of marrying my mother, the reminder of a dead man in his house. He'd tolerated me for 25 years, and now that toleration was down to this: sign the paper, girl, and stop being the ghost's daughter at my table. I looked at the pen my mother had set beside the document. I looked at the typed letters of my own name, and I did the thing my grandmother taught me. I said nothing, and I did not pick up the pen, and I let the silence get so long and so heavy that my mother's warm smile started to curdle at the edges. Thea, she said, an inch of steel showing now, pick up the pen. I think, I said quietly, we should wait for Mr. Pratt. Mr. Pratt is not family. No, I agreed, he isn't, which is exactly why I'd like him here before anyone signs anything. The kitchen door opened, and Howard Pratt walked in, 70-some years old, gray suit, a scuffed briefcase, moving without hurry, and took one long look at the notary and the stapled document sitting in front of me, and my mother in Ruth's chair. Well, he said dryly, setting his briefcase on the counter, it seems I'm just in time. My mother recovered fast. She always did. Howard, we were just getting organized. Dale here is a notary, so I thought... Yes, I can see what you thought. Pratt pulled out the chair at the foot of the table, pointedly not taking a seat any of them had left for him, and sat. He picked up the family settlement agreement, held it at arm's length, read the first paragraph, then the fourth. Something in his face went very still. He set it down. He slid it with one finger back across the table toward my mother. "Mrs. Marsh," he said, "as the appointed executor of Ruth Lindqvist's estate, I'm going to give you one piece of free legal advice, and then we're going to do this properly." A pause. "Put this away, and do not, under any circumstances, ask anyone at this table to sign it before I've finished reading what I came here to read. For your own sake." For your own sake. My mother didn't understand the warning in it. I did. I felt the key at my wrist, and I kept my face as still as a monitor at 3 a.m. "Now!" Pratt opened his briefcase and drew out a slim leather folder and set it square on the oak table and folded his hands on top of it. "Ruth Lindqvist retained me for 22 years. In that time, she gave me very few instructions, and every one of them was precise. Her final instruction was that this be read aloud, in this house, at this table, with all of you present." He looked around at each of us. "So that is what we'll do." My mother settled back into Grandma's chair, and I watched the confidence flow back into her, because she'd decided the document had been a nice try, and now we were back to the reading she expected. The old, sentimental woman, the modest house, the girl who'd get some keepsakes and a lecture. She had no idea what was in the folder. She even smiled at me, a small, victorious, patient smile, the smile of a woman certain she was about to be proven right. Pratt opened the folder. "We'll begin with the residence," he said. He read the legal description of the house, the lot number, the address I'd walked into 10,000 times. Then he read the disposition. "I leave my home and the land it sits on to my granddaughter Thea Lindqvist and my daughter Rosemary Lindqvist, jointly, to do with as they see fit. It is Daniel's family's house. I want it to stay that way." The kitchen went quiet. My mother's smile didn't move, but something behind it did. She'd assumed the house would be sold, the proceeds folded into the estate, split among the family, which in her math meant her. She had not planned on the house going to me and Rosemary, over her head, with a sentence that used the word Daniel out loud in her own hearing for the first time in 20 years. Gary shifted in his seat. "That house is worth what, $240? And it just goes to them? What about—" "It goes to them," Pratt said without looking up. "As written." My mother put a hand on Gary's arm, a small, practiced gesture. "Let it go." And I understood her calculation exactly, because I'd spent my life learning to read her. The house didn't matter to her right now. She'd already taken the thing she'd come for 2 weeks ago on this very table. 41,000 liquid dollars already spent, already safe. Let the girl have a house full of a dead man's ghosts. Rhonda had the cash. She had no idea that was the one thing she didn't have. Pratt turned a page. "Personal effects," he said. "Your grandmother was specific. I'll read them as written." He went down the list, and every line was a small, quiet blade. And I don't think anyone but me and Rosemary understood that we were listening to a woman speak from the grave with perfect aim. "My wedding ring and my mother's ring to Thea. A woman should have something old that was only ever given in love. My recipe box to Thea, who is the only one who ever stood at my counter and actually learned. And then the one that changed the temperature in the room. The photographs of my son Daniel, all of them, every frame, to my granddaughter Thea, because she is the only person in this family who never once let them tell her that her father wasn't real." I heard Rosemary's breath catch beside me. My mother's chin lifted, just slightly, a hairline crack in the porcelain. But she said nothing, because what was there to say? The will was leaving me a box of photographs she'd already stacked face down by the door, and to object would be to admit she'd taken them down at all, in front of a lawyer, in front of a notary she'd brought herself. Then Pratt read the line that made her flinch. "To Rhonda," he read, "I leave the framed photograph of Daniel that used to hang beside my front door. I have kept it safe for you for 20 years. It is time you let yourself look at him again." My mother's mouth opened, closed. It was the cruelest kindness I have ever heard. My grandmother, dying, had left her son's widow a photograph of the man she'd spent 2 decades erasing, and framed it not as an accusation, but as an invitation, which made it 1,000 times worse. Because you can rage against an insult. You can't rage against grace. It just sits there and shows you exactly what you are. That's Very thoughtful, my mother managed, in a voice with no floor under it. She was a thoughtful woman, Pratt said mildly. Cody, at the end of the table, had stopped scrolling. He was watching now, some animal part of him sensing the shift, the way you sense weather change before the sky does anything. Is that everything? My mother asked. And there was the tell, the small hunger under the grief. She'd sat through the house and the rings and the photographs, and now she wanted the part she'd actually come for. I mean, is that the whole estate? Because I know Ruth had some savings, and I just think we should be clear about how— There is one final matter, Howard Pratt said, and he closed the folder of personal effects and set it aside and drew out a second folder, thicker, older, its edges soft with age. He laid it on the oak table and squared it with both hands, slow and deliberate, the way you set down something heavy you've carried a long way. My mother sat up, leaned in, and smiled, a real one this time, the first real smile she'd shown all afternoon, because here it was, the money, the savings, the part where the estate got divided and Rhonda got her share. She had waited 11 years for this. She had waited for Ruth to die for this. She had absolutely no idea what was about to come out of her own mother-in-law's mouth through a lawyer's in her own stolen chair. This concerns a specific bank account, Pratt said. Account number ending 4208, held at First Cascade Bank. He looked up once, and his eyes found mine for half a second, and then went back to the page. Your grandmother left explicit written instructions that the origin of this account be read aloud in full before any other discussion of it takes place. My mother's smile widened. 4208, the account she'd emptied. She thought this was her victory lap. Go ahead, Howard, she said warmly. We're all family here. Howard Pratt looked down at the page, and he read the first line. The funds in this account are not mine, and never were. They are the proceeds of a life insurance policy taken out by my son, Daniel Lindqvist, before his death in 1998, designated by him for one person only, his daughter, Thea. The kitchen went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum. My mother's smile stayed on her face for one full second after the words landed, like a light left on in a house nobody lives in anymore. Then it slid off, all at once, and I watched 28 years of certainty drain out of my mother's face in real time. No, she said. That's not right. That was Ruth's account. That was her savings. It was not, Pratt said, and kept reading. When Daniel died, he had named me, his mother, as beneficiary. He did this deliberately because he did not trust that the money would reach his daughter otherwise. I received $41,000 in the spring of 1999. I opened this account with it and only it, and I have never added a single dollar of my own, nor spent a single dollar of his. Every statement is labeled. Every year is accounted for. I have held it in trust, in love, for 27 years, waiting for the day my granddaughter would be ready to receive what her father left her. My mother had gone the color of paper. It was never mine to give, Howard Pratt read, and his dry old voice did not soften, and it did not rush. And it was never anyone else's to take. If, when this is read, the account has been touched by anyone, I want it stated plainly in front of this family whose money it truly was. It is Daniel's. It is Thea's. It was always only Thea's. He set the page down. The silence that followed had a weight to it. It pressed on the whole room. No, my mother's voice cracked out of her. No, she was confused. She was old and sick, and, Howard, she didn't know what she was signing. She signed it 8 months before she died, Pratt said. It was witnessed and notarized. I was present. She was entirely lucid, Mrs. Marsh. In fact, she was one of the most lucid people I have ever taken instruction from. He let that sit. The medical and legal record is very clear. This will not be a productive avenue for you. Gary leaned forward, and I watched him doing the thing men like Gary do, trying to find the angle, the loophole, the version where this is fine. Okay, but say it is the girl's money. Fine. It was in Ruth's name. When Ruth died, it goes to the estate, and the estate divides, so— No. Pratt didn't even let him finish. That is not how this works, and I'd advise you to stop talking, Mr. Marsh, because you have a specific and serious problem, and every word you say is making it worse. Gary shut his mouth. Pratt folded his hands on the old folder and looked around the table. And for the first time, the dry lawyer's voice picked up an edge, and I realized my grandmother had chosen this man not just because he was precise, but because underneath the gray suit he was, quietly, on my side. "Let me explain the situation as it actually stands," he said, "legally, so there's no confusion in this room and no fantasies survive it." And Howard Pratt laid it out, one nail at a time. First, because this account was funded exclusively by Daniel's insurance, held separately, never commingled, labeled for a named beneficiary for 27 years, and documented by written declarations from both the insured and the custodian. The law does not treat it as part of Ruth's general estate. It is a trust in substance, if not in name. It has one rightful owner. Her name is Thea Lindqvist. It is not the estate's. It is not divisible. It never was. My mother's mouth was moving with no sound coming out. Second, Pratt turned, very deliberately, to face her directly. "Mrs. Marsh, Ruth added you to her online banking 2 years ago, as a convenience, to help her pay bills as her eyesight failed. That is a limited power of attorney. And a power of attorney, I want you to hear this clearly, terminates instantly upon the death of the person who granted it. The moment Ruth passed, your authority over any account she held ended completely and absolutely." He let that hang. "You transferred $41,000 out of that account 9 days after she died. I have the dated records. You did it with no legal authority whatsoever, from an account you did not own, holding funds that belonged to your daughter. In plain terms, Mrs. Marsh, you did not help settle the estate. You converted another person's property. That has a name, and it is not a kind one, and it is actionable in both civil and, depending on how a prosecutor feels, criminal court." Cody's phone hit the table with a clatter. "Wait," my half-brother said. His voice had gone high and young. "Wait, what money? Mom, what is he talking about? The 41 grand, you said that was Grandma's savings. You said it was family money." My mother didn't answer him. "Mom." Cody's face was doing something I'd never seen it do. "You told me it was Grandma's savings. Whose money did I spend?" And there it was, the one moment of near sympathy I'll allow in this story, because it was real, and I won't lie to you to make it cleaner. Because Cody, for all his entitlement, for all the copper letters and the leased car and the reels, genuinely hadn't known. My mother had handed her son a dead man's last gift to his own daughter, called it family money, and let her boy build his dream on top of it without ever telling him what it was. She'd used Cody the same way she'd used me, as a piece in her arithmetic. She'd just called his piece the future and mine the past. For 1 second I felt sorry for him. Then I remembered he'd never asked, not once, and I let the sympathy go. And that was when my mother broke. "This is unbelievable." She was on her feet now, both hands flat on Grandma's table, her voice climbing. "This is exactly what she wanted, isn't it? To turn my own children against me from the grave. You—" She wheeled on me. "You did this. You went crawling to that old woman and you cooked this up, the two of you, to humiliate me in my own— It's not your house, Rhonda," Rosemary said quietly. "It's ours now. She just read you the paper." My mother didn't hear it. She was past hearing. "After everything I did for you," she said to me, and her voice was shaking. And it was the voice I'd heard my whole life, the one that turned every one of her failures into my betrayals. "I raised you. I fed you. I clothed you. I kept a roof over your head after your father left us with nothing." "He didn't leave us with nothing," I said. I said it quietly. I didn't stand. I didn't raise my voice. 28 years, and I finally understood that the calm was the whole point, that she needed me to scream so she could call me hysterical, and I was simply never going to give her that again. "He left me $41,000, I said. "You just told everyone he left us with nothing, and you were sitting on his life insurance the whole time, spending it on copper letters. He didn't leave us with nothing, Mom. He left it to me, and you took it." And then I did the thing I'd planned in the quiet of a bank vault 2 days before. I reached into my bag, and I took out the plain envelope, and I slid the photograph out of it, and I set it face up on the oak table in the middle of all of them, my father. Waist deep in a green lake, a 5-year-old girl on his shoulders, her hands buried in his hair, both of them squinting into a summer that ended before I could keep it. "That's him," I said. That's my father. You took every picture of him off 2 different walls, and Grandma kept this one in a vault for 28 years, so you couldn't. Look at it, Mom. That's the man whose money paid for Cody's sign. Nobody touched it. Nobody could. My mother stared at that photograph like it might come off the table and take her by the throat. You were right about one thing, I told her. And here was the sentence I'd been carrying since that Saturday on the counter, turned all the way around. All these years you kept telling me it was never really mine. The money, the account, my place at this table. I stood up now slowly and picked up the photograph and held it against my chest. You were right. It was never really mine. It was his. And you don't get to take what belongs to the dead. The kitchen was silent. Howard Pratt cleared his throat gently into that silence and brought us back to the one language my mother had never been able to argue her way out of, the law. To be practical, he said, the $41,000 must be returned to Ms. Lindqvist in full. I'll be sending a formal demand within the week. If it isn't returned, I am obligated, as executor and under the terms Ruth left me, to pursue recovery through the courts, a civil action for conversion, against whoever holds the funds and whoever transferred them. He looked not unkindly at Cody. That would be you, Mr. Marsh, and your mother. I'd strongly suggest you speak to an attorney of your own today, and I'd suggest the money come back voluntarily. It goes much worse for everyone if it doesn't. It's spent, Cody said numbly. Most of it, the sign, the renovation, I paid down the loan. Then it will have to be found, Pratt said. That is not Ms. Lindqvist's problem to solve. It is yours. And then the thing I hadn't planned for, but should have. They turned on each other. Gary rounded on my mother first. 25 years of the calm, agreeable stepfather gone in a second. You told me it was clean, Rhonda. His voice was low and furious. You sat in my truck, and you told me Ruth left that money to the family, that the girl had no claim, that it was fine. I co-signed everything on Cody's place because you swore that money was coming to cover it. You told me it was ours. It was ours, my mother snapped. It was in Ruth's name, Gary. How was I supposed to— He just said there's a letter from 1998 in the dead man's handwriting. Gary's face was gray. You knew Ruth called it Thea's. You told me yourself years ago that Ruth wouldn't let go of Daniel's money. You knew, Rhonda. The room heard it. Even Cody heard it. My mother had known for over a decade exactly whose money it was, and she'd told her husband a cleaner story, and now the cleaner story was on fire in her own mother-in-law's kitchen. Mom! Cody's voice cracked all the way through. If I have to pay back $41,000, Copperline's done. The loan, the build-out, I'm underwater already. You said this was the thing that saved it. You said Grandma wanted to help me. He looked at the photograph in my hands like he was seeing my father for the first time. Whose money did I spend? Nobody answered him. Nobody had to. My mother did the only thing she knew how to do when the walls came in. She looked for the exit that made her the victim. This is Ruth, she said, to the room, to the ceiling, to God. This is that woman reaching out of her grave to punish me for moving on. She never forgave me for remarrying. She poisoned Thea against me for 30 years, and now she's blown up this family, and you're all just going to let her— Rhonda! Rosemary's voice cut across it, flat and final. Ruth didn't blow up anything. She caught you. There's a difference. And the only reason you're sitting in her chair right now is because she's not here to take it back. Dale the notary was already on his feet, gathering his little stamp and his folio, muttering about how he really shouldn't be here for this, and edging toward the door. Nobody stopped him. His stapled document sat abandoned in the middle of the table, next to the photograph of a man in a green lake, and it looked exactly as small and cheap as it was. And I watched it land on all of them at once, the real shape of what they'd done. Gary, who'd co-signed everything, who was on the hook for Cody's loans and now on the hook for this, put his face in his hands. Cody sat there white and shaking, doing math that didn't work. And my mother tried one last time the only move she had left. She sat back down. She softened. She reached across the table, past the photograph she couldn't look at, and she made her voice small and wet and wounded. Thea, honey, we're family. Are you really going to take your own mother to court? Over money? Your grandmother wouldn't have wanted that. She'd be heartbroken to see us like this. And I want to tell you that landed nothing. But it did land something. a small, old ache, the 6-year-old in the hallway, the child who still, God help me, wanted her mother to be someone else. I let myself feel it, and then I answered her honestly. Grandma spent the last 8 months of her life making sure this exact conversation would happen, I said. In this exact room. She's not heartbroken, Mom. She's finally finished. I picked up my box of photographs and the little envelope with the rings, and I felt the brass key on its blue ribbon at my wrist. I'm not taking you to court. Mr. Pratt is going to recover my father's money because that's his job and because Grandma told him to. What I'm doing is much simpler than a lawsuit. I looked at my mother, at Gary, at Cody, at the bare walls where 2 generations of my father's photographs used to hang. I'm leaving, I said, and I'm not coming back. You spent my whole life telling me I wasn't really part of this family. I'm finally going to believe you. I picked up the box of photographs from beside the door. My father's face, all of it, no longer clutter, no longer anyone's to put away. Howard Pratt stood as I passed and said quietly, "Just for me. She'd be proud of you. She told me you'd be the calm one. She was right." I couldn't answer that without breaking, so I just nodded. At the door I stopped and looked one last time at the bare wall in the living room, the pale rectangles, the empty spaces my mother had made twice in 2 houses. Then I walked out into the afternoon with my father in a cardboard box under my arm and my aunt's hand on my back, and I did not look at my mother again. Behind me, in the kitchen, I could hear them starting to shout. Gary at Rhonda, Cody at both of them. The sound of a family that had never once fought fair now fighting over the wreckage. I closed the door on it gently, the way you close a box you're finally done unpacking, if you're still with me. And if any of this has cracked something open in you tonight, take a breath with me here, because this is the part that matters. Somewhere out there, you might be the quiet one in your family, the one who got subtracted, the one they're sure will never make trouble. I'm not telling you to burn anything down. I'm telling you what my grandmother taught me. The truth is a weapon you only get to fire once, so you wait, and you get your paper in order, and you fire it in the right room. If someone once protected you the way Ruth protected me, go tell them, while they can still hear it. And if you're carrying a truth your family made you doubt, hold on to it. It's real. You didn't imagine him. Let me tell you how it ended. The money came back. It took 4 months. Faced with Pratt's demand and the words civil suit and possible criminal referral, my mother and Gary refinanced their own home to repay the $41,000 rather than stand in front of a judge. Copper Line Kitchen closed that fall. The copper letters came down off the sign. I heard about all of it secondhand, from my cousin Denise, and I felt no joy in any of it, only the flat quiet of watching the truth finish a job my grandmother had started. I never spoke to my mother again. She sent 1 letter, 3 pages, all the old notes, her sacrifice, my betrayal, family, family, family. I read half a page and set it down. Going no contact wasn't my revenge. It was just me, at long last, taking her at her word about where I'd always stood, and choosing to build a life on solid ground instead of on her arithmetic. Cody texted me months later, just a short line. I didn't know. Sorry. I believe him. I wrote back, I know. Take care of yourself. That was all I had for him. Maybe someday there'll be more. Maybe there won't. I've made my peace with not knowing. Rosemary and I kept the house, Daniel's family's house, the way Grandma wanted. We spent a whole weekend rehanging the photographs on the living room wall my mother had stripped bare. Twice, across 2 houses and 28 years. My father at 12, holding up a fish, my father graduating, my father holding me the day I was born, and in the center, in a brand new frame, the green lake, the shoulders, the little girl with her hands buried in his hair. His money I didn't spend on myself. Not really. I used it the way I believe he'd have wanted. Part of it became the down payment on a small house with my name, only my name, on the deed. The first thing I've ever owned that nobody alive can call never really yours. The rest I set aside, in an account I labeled in my own careful hand, the way my grandmother taught me at that oak table a lifetime ago. I still have the brass key on its faded blue ribbon. It sits in a dish on my nightstand where I see it first thing every morning. The box it opened is empty now, but I'll keep the key until I die. Because it's proof that somebody saw me, that a dying woman spent the last strength she had making sure a lost little girl's father could still find a way to show up for her. and that the quietest person at the table is not the weakest one there. She's just the one who waited for the right moment, with her papers in order and the truth on her side. Here's what my grandmother taught me, and what I'll leave you with. If you love someone, don't only leave them what you have, leave them the truth of where it came from, in writing, where no one can take it or twist it, because that truth will outlive you and show up on the day you no longer can. That's my story. A brass key, a green lake, and a grandmother who was 3 moves ahead of them all. If it made you think of someone who once protected you when no one else did, go tell them today while they can still hear it. Drop a comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.